The cowboy who fought bulls for a living, but lost to his own demons. Asterisk, he used to fight bulls for a living. Now he avoids even looking at one. Most people think the hardest part of being a cowboy is staying on the bull. But for Jed Carson, it was waking up in the morning and knowing his brother wasn't. He didn't ride anymore. Didn't cheer at rodeos or tell old stories at bars. These days, Jed fixed fences, replaced old boards, hammered nails into wood that had already seen too. Many summers. And maybe that's why, when the morning sun rose over the hills that day, something felt different. Because someone was coming. And silence wouldn't be enough to keep her out. The road leading to the ranch was cracked and dusty. The kind of road no one really used unless they were lost or coming back from somewhere they didn't want to be. The sky was wide, the wind dry. And Jed stood there, hammer in hand, sweat already gathering under his collar, staring at a piece of wood that wasn't cooperating. He wasn't thinking about much. Just the work, the rhythm, the ache in his back. But then a bull in the distance lifted its head and stared straight at him. Big one? Black with a white stripe down the middle of its forehead. Jed froze. Something about the way that bull looked at him, it brought it all back. The roar of the crowd, the gate swinging open, his brother's voice behind him, and then the silence. Yet's hand went to his ribs without thinking. The scar was still there, the kind that never really fades. The bull turned away, uninterested. But the memory stayed. He swung the hammer again. Thud, another nail. Another day, a few miles away in a small town library, Ellie Nash placed a teacup on a windowsill. She was used to quiet mornings, books, dust, the sound of old folks, shuffling in for company more than stories. She wasn't looking for change, but something felt different today. Old Buck, the usual morning visitor, set down his paper and said with a grin, "Rodeo's back Saturday. Those boys still chasing bulls like they ain't got sense." Ellie smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I've never been to one," she said. "You? Never?" "Nope. Heard it's loud. Real loud." "It is," Buck nodded. "There was a cowboy once, could ride like the wind, then he just disappeared." Ellie didn't ask more, but her gaze drifted to the window. Out where the road stretched past town and into the hills. She didn't know why, but something tugged at her chest. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was something else. That afternoon, she found herself standing at the edge of the rodeo arena. The bleachers were filled with noise, families, kids with cotton candy, announcers shouting into two loud microphones. But Ellie wasn't looking at the bulls. She was scanning the crowd, and then she saw him. Man standing alone, just outside the arena, not sitting, not cheering. He didn't look like a spectator. He looked like someone who had once been in the dirt. Not above it, Jed didn't move. His eyes were locked on the ring. Every snore, every kick, every fall, he watched them like someone who already knew the ending. Ellie watched him instead. Then a bull bucked hard and sent a rider flying. The crowd gasped. Jed didn't flinch. She turned to look at him. He caught her eye just for a second. He nodded, almost like he recognized her. Or maybe just the quiet in her. She gave a small, uncertain smile. When she turned back toward the arena, he was gone. That night, as the sun dipped low and the rodeo lights buzzed behind her, Ellie walked home along the same dusty road. Up ahead, an old wagon rumbled slowly, pulled by a tired horse. Behind her, a pickup truck rolled up and slowed to a stop. Jed. He leaned out the window. "Need a ride?" She hesitated. Something in his voice was steady, like the ground under her feet. "Yeah, thanks." They drove in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't ask for anything. But just as they came around a bend, the wagon up ahead jolted and tipped off the edge of the road. The horse spooked. The old man driving the wagon didn't move. "Hold on," Jed said, already cranking the wheel. The truck bounced hard down into the ditch. Dust rose. Jed jumped out without a word. Ellie followed, heart pounding. And in that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of a stranger's past, something began. It wasn't love. Not yet, but it was something real. And neither of them knew it yet. But their quiet lives were about to change forever. The ditch was steeper than it looked. Weeds tangled around the fallen wagon, and the horse snorted, legs trembling as it tried to stand. Its harness had snapped halfway, still tangled in splintered wood. Jed didn't pause. He slid down the slope like he'd done it 100 times, boots digging in for grip. Ellie wasn't far behind, careful but determined, her hands clutching her skirt as she moved. The old man lay half covered by the broken seat. His eyes were open, barely. Blood traced a line down the side of his face, and his chest rose unevenly. One of his legs looked twisted wrong. Ellie crouched beside him, her breath catching. "Don't move him too fast," she whispered. Jed nodded, voice low but steady. "He's breathing, that's good. Gotta lift this piece off." He gripped the wooden beam that pinned the man's side. With one heave, the board shifted. The man groaned, but his eyes didn't close. "Hang on," Jed murmured. We've got you." While Jed eased the old man upright, Ellie spotted something under the wagon. A wooden box, half crushed but still closed. She pulled it out gently, brushing off the dust and broken twine. It had a strap wrapped around it and a small metal clasp. "Is this yours?" she asked. The old man blinked slowly. His lips moved, voice just a breath. "Don't throw them away," he said. "They're all I've got." Ellie clutched the box tighter to her chest. "We won't," she promised. They got him into the back of Yet's truck as gently as they could. The drive back to town was silent. Just the rattle of the engine and the old man's strained breaths in the back seat. Ellie held the box the whole way, like it might fall apart if she let go. At the town clinic, Dr. Marion, a quiet man with a kind face and hands that shook just a little, met them at the door. He didn't ask too many questions, just nodded, checked the old man's pulse, and guided him into a room with yellow curtains and a worn-out fan. "He's stable for now," Marion said, wiping his hands. "Broken ribs, maybe a mild concussion. But I'm more worried about his heart. It's fragile." Ellie looked down at the box again. "He called them letters," she said softly. "Said not to throw them away." The doctor gave a tired nod. "Then you'd best keep them safe." Later that night, Jed sat outside the clinic on the back step, elbows resting on his knees. The air was still but not quiet. Somewhere in the distance, frogs croaked near the creek, and the town's only bar let out muffled laughter and a country song about loss. Ellie stepped outside, with a blanket around her shoulders. "The motel's full," she said. "Rodeo weekend." Jed glanced at her. "There's a storage shed behind the clinic. It's not much, but the stove works, and the couch doesn't bite." She smiled gently. "That'll do." Inside the shed, the stove gave off a soft orange glow. It smelled like dust and old paper, but it was warm. Ellie sat on the couch, curled the blanket around her, and laid the box of letters on her lap. "I'm gonna read one," she said. Jed didn't respond, but he didn't stop her either. She opened the box slowly. The letters were folded neatly, some yellowed at the edges, a few with ink stains. She picked one near the top. The paper was fragile. The handwriting was steady, bold. A man's hand. Ellie began to read. "Dear Ruth, I stood at the station today, thinking if you don't show up, then maybe all this was for nothing. But then I saw you. I saw your shoes first, dusty, worn, and my heart hit like thunder. Not because of the shoes, but because you came. You didn't change your mind. And I knew right then, if we can survive war, poverty, and people's judgment, then this isn't just love. This is life, ours, the kind that keeps going even when everything else stops." Her voice faded for a moment. She blinked and looked up. Jed was still by the stove, staring at the floor, hands folded, shoulders stiff. "He loved her," Ellie said quietly. "The real kind, not loud, not perfect. Just true. Yet's jaw clenched. Hard to believe in that anymore. He muttered. Ellie didn't answer. She folded the letter and placed it back in the box with care. Then she pulled her blanket tighter and leaned back against the couch. The fire crackled low. Outside, the wind picked up just a little. It tapped the windows like it had something to say, but neither of them spoke. Jed sat in silence for a long time. Then, finally, he stood and stretched his back with a slow wince. As he turned toward the door, he paused. "You can read another tomorrow," he said, "if you want." And then he left her with the box, the fire, and the ghost of a love that hadn't died, just waited. By the time the sun climbed over the ridge the next morning, the sky was already soft with heat. That kind of dry, silent warmth that hangs in the air like a held breath. Inside the shed, Ellie sat curled on the worn-out couch, her eyes on the box of letters resting beside her like it had weight far beyond paper. She hadn't slept much. Every time she closed her eyes, she'd hear the old man's voice again. "Don't throw them away. They're all I've got." She didn't know who Ruth was. Didn't know who he was either, not really. But something about that first letter had stayed with her. The honesty. The ache. The way it sounded like someone still reaching across. Time for a love they refused to let go of. Jed knocked once before stepping inside. He carried 2 paper cups of coffee, black, steaming, and a brown bag that smelled faintly like sausage and eggs. "Found a church lady selling breakfast down the road," he said, handing her one. "I figured you hadn't eaten." Ellie blinked at him, surprised. "Thanks, I hadn't." Jed didn't say much else. Just settled onto the overturned crate near the stove, unwrapped his sandwich, and ate like it was the first real food in a long while. And maybe it was. For a while they sat in silence. Comfortable, not awkward. Ellie picked up another letter. She held it between her fingers like it might fall apart. "Want me to read one?" Jed didn't answer, but he didn't stop her either. That was enough. She opened the letter and started. "Ruth, you disappeared for 2 days last spring. Didn't say where, didn't leave a note. I looked everywhere. Finally found you sitting on that old ridge by the creek, like the world hadn't. Gone and turned inside out. You didn't cry, you didn't talk, you just looked at me. And I didn't ask. I just sat beside you. I still think about that day. How love isn't always fixing things. Sometimes it's just being there. Quiet, unmoving, like a porch that doesn't creak when the wind gets mean." Ellie stopped and looked over at Jed. He was staring at the wall, his food untouched. His jaw was tight, eyes distant. "I don't know why this is hitting me so hard," she said softly. "I don't even know them." Jed set his sandwich down. "Because real love sticks to your bones," he muttered. "Even if it ain't yours." She watched him a moment longer. Something was shifting in him, not quickly, but she could feel it. Like a thaw that starts from the inside. Later that day, they stopped by the clinic again. The old man, Walter, was still unconscious. Machines beeped softly. His chest rose and fell like it was counting time. Dr. Marion stood nearby, scribbling. On a clipboard, his body's holding on, he said. That his heart's the question. If he wakes up, he'll need care. Regular meals, medication, a familiar voice. Ellie glanced at the box of letters on the chair beside her. He doesn't have anyone. Marion shook his head. Far as I can tell, no kids. No wife. Might have had both once, but no one's come asking. Jed, quiet as ever, leaned against the window, arms folded. We can't just leave him here, Ellie said. He's not a problem to patch up and ignore. You got a place for him? The doctor asked. Ellie hesitated. There's a back room behind my kitchen. It's small. Clean enough. Marion gave a nod. If you're serious, I'll release him to you as soon as he's stable. Jed didn't say a word until they were outside, walking toward the truck. You. Sure you want to take that on? He asked, keeping his eyes forward. Ellie nodded. Yeah. I can't explain it, but I feel like those letters were never supposed to stay unread. He deserves more than that. They stopped near the truck. Jed looked at her then. A long, quiet look, not full of pity, not full of questions. Just understanding. I'll help, he said. Just till the end of the week. She smiled, soft and real. Why the week? He looked down, then shrugged. So, if someone asks me why I stayed, I'll have a reason. Ellie didn't answer, but her smile deepened. That night, they moved Walter into the back room of her house. He barely stirred, but Ellie made sure his pillow was clean and the blanket tucked right. Jed helped without a word, adjusting the mattress and turning down the lamp. Outside, the air had cooled again. The kind of night that invites you to breathe a little slower. Jed sat on the porch step. Ellie joined him, holding the next letter in her hands. Ruth, the doctor said the baby didn't make it. You didn't say anything, just stared at the wall. I wanted to scream, to break something, but I didn't. I held your hand and watched you breathe. I thought I might lose you too, but you stayed and I stayed. And that's what love is, I think. Not fireworks, not rescue, just not leaving. Ellie's voice cracked a little at the end. She wiped the corner of her eye. Jed didn't move, but something in his face shifted. Not quite pain. Not quite peace, just something human. Ellie didn't say anything else. She folded the letter, placed it back in the box, and leaned her head gently against the post beside her. And for the first time in a long while, Jed didn't feel alone. The morning came slow and pale, with a gray sky that looked like it couldn't make up its mind. Inside the small house behind the library, Ellie stirred quietly. She didn't move fast, didn't make noise. Walter was asleep in the next room, and she didn't want to wake him. Jed had already been up. She could hear him moving outside, boots in the gravel, wood thumping against wood. Ellie stepped onto the porch with her sweater wrapped around her shoulders. The air was still cool. Jed was fixing a step that had come loose. His sleeves were rolled up, and the back of his neck was damp with sweat. You work even on rest days? She asked, voice soft. Jed didn't look up. You stop fixing things around here. They fall apart. Fast? She smiled a little. You say that like you're not talking about steps. He glanced at her, the corner of his mouth twitching just slightly. I might be. She came down the steps, holding the box of letters to her chest. He stirred last night, she said. Just for a second. Sighed Ruth's name, yet's hands froze. Then he slowly went back to hammering. Do you ever say names out loud? Ellie asked. When you're alone? Jed didn't answer. He kept working like the hammer was the only thing holding his world together. But later, after breakfast, when the sky finally cracked open and spilled sun across the hills, he sat down at the kitchen table across from her. The letters were spread between them. Ellie sipped her tea. Jed watched her fingers trace the edges of the paper. Then he spoke, low like gravel under boots. I had a brother. She looked up slowly. 3 years younger. Name was Sam. He paused, cleared his throat. He was the reason I rode bulls in the first place. We were just kids, you know? Climbing fences we weren't supposed to, betting who could stay on a calf the longest. He was fearless. Could climb on anything and ride it like it owed him something. Ellie said nothing. Just listened, her hands still on the letters. Was this one rodeo? Jed continued. He'd messed up his leg 2 weeks before. Doctor told him no riding. But we'd gotten an invite, big time. The kind you dream about. He leaned back, looking past her like he was seeing a different place, a different version of himself. He couldn't ride. So I said I'd take his spot. Ride for both of us. Stupid, really. Just a way to keep the dream alive a little longer. His voice dropped to a whisper. That bull came out wild. Meaner than most. Tossed me in seconds. I hit the dirt face first. Couldn't even breathe. And that's when I saw it. The bull turning, heading for the fence. For Sam. Yet's hands curled into fists on the table. No barrier. No time. He was standing too close. I should have shouted. Should have moved. But I just laid there, like some kind of frozen fool. And then I heard the screams. Ellie's eyes were wet, but she didn't wipe them. He died 2 days later. Never woke up. Jed looked down at the table. And ever since that day, I've lived with one thing stuck in my chest like a blade. If I hadn't taken that ride, he'd still be here. Silence filled the space between them, but not an empty silence. It was the kind that holds pain like a bowl too full. Ellie reached across the table slowly. She didn't grab his hand, just placed hers beside it, close, near enough to feel real. You didn't freeze, she said quietly. You were broken. There's a difference. Jed didn't look up, but his shoulders sank like something heavy had been laid down, even. Just a little. That night, after Walter had been tucked in and the windows were cracked open to let in the breeze, Ellie stood by the record player near the window. It was old. The kind of machine that only played cassettes and didn't care about sound quality. She popped in a tape. Soft, scratchy country music filled the room. Not loud, not polished. Just honest. Jed leaned against the doorframe. Watching. I read. Another letter today, Ellie said. They danced once. Ruth and Walter. On someone else's porch while the owners were off at a funeral. Just danced. No music, no plan. Just love. She turned slowly and held out a hand. Dance with. Jed blinked, like she'd spoken in another language. I don't dance, he muttered. You used to ride bulls. You can sway in a circle with your boots on. He didn't move. But then, slowly, like his body remembered what it felt like to be near someone without flinching, he walked toward her. They stood close. Too close. Not enough. His hand hovered near her waist. Her fingers rested on his shoulder. At first, it was stiff, awkward. But then they found it. That slow, unspoken rhythm. A step. A breath. A heartbeat. And in that tiny kitchen, surrounded by old wallpaper and low light, Jed stopped thinking about his brother. Ellie stopped worrying about getting too close. They were just there. Dancing. No words. No past. Just two people, holding on to something they didn't expect, and neither of them wanted to let go. Asterisk, the days started to settle into something almost normal. Walter was still recovering, but his color was better. He could hold a spoon, speak a little more clearly, and sometimes smile at something Ellie read from the letters. Jed spent his mornings out by the pasture, fixing a broken gate or trimming overgrown brush near the fence. Ellie would teach reading to a group of kids in the church basement. Afternoons, she'd return home, set water to boil, and read beside Walter's bed while Jed sat nearby, carving strips of leather or just listening. It wasn't perfect. It was peaceful. Until the envelope came. It was plain. White. No return address, just her name typed in block letters. Ellie almost tossed it onto the counter without reading. But something stopped her. She opened it slowly. Her eyes scanned the page, then stopped. Her hands lowered to the table. She just sat. Jed walked in, brushing dust from his sleeves. Fence posts done. Should hold through next storm, he said, but trailed off when he saw her face. What happened? She looked up. Her eyes were distant, like she was trying to catch up to reality. I've got 2 weeks, she said. 2 weeks for what? They're taking the land. Her voice cracked. If I don't pay, it's gone. Jed stepped closer. How much? More than I have. Almost double. The church can't help. They've got their own debts. I already asked. He didn't say anything. Just nodded once. Walked out back without another word. She watched him go, unsure whether to be comforted or worried. He didn't come back in for a while. When he did, he was wearing an old, dust-covered shirt, dark brown with stitched shoulders, and holding a small duffel bag that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. He set it on the table. Ellie stared at it. What's that? Gear bag, he said simply. Rope, gloves, vest. The kind they used to sponsor. Her breath caught. No, don't even say it. There's a rodeo this weekend, he continued. Big pot. Prize money'll cover your payment. Maybe more. Jed, no, she said, standing. You're not doing that. You know what happened last time. You can't. I can, he said, quiet but firm. And I will. Ellie's eyes filled with tears. You could die. I've already been half dead for years, Ellie. Her voice rose. You don't owe me anything. This land, this house, it's not worth risking you. He stepped forward, gently placed a hand on her shoulder. I'm not doing it to prove anything, he said. I'm doing it because I won't stand by and let someone I care about lose the one place she calls home. She shook her head, overwhelmed. And what happens when you're gone? I get to keep the house but lose you? He looked down. Then met her eyes again, softer this time. I lost my brother because I didn't move, didn't act. This time, I'm going to act. I have to. There were no more words, just the heavy truth between them. The night before the rodeo, the air was thick, with heat and tension. Walter had fallen asleep early, the fan humming beside his bed. Ellie stood alone on the porch, arms folded, staring at the sky. Jed joined her quietly. You ever ride for something other than pride? She asked. He didn't answer for a long moment. No, never had a reason to. She turned, her voice low. Don't let me be the reason you don't come back. He touched her hand gently. You're not the reason I'm risking something. You're the reason I'm remembering what it's like to have something to risk. And with that, he went inside. The next evening, the rodeo grounds were alive with noise. Dust kicked up into the air as riders stretched and bulls pawed the dirt. The announcer's voice echoed over the loudspeakers. Kids yelled, flags waved. And vendors shouted about lemonade and barbecue, but Ellie wasn't hearing any of it. She was in the bleachers, frozen, watching the shoot, waiting for one name to be called Jed Carson. She spotted him behind the gate, the same brown shirt, vest strapped on, rope wound tight around his hand. He wasn't smiling. Wasn't nervous. He looked still, settled like a man who had already faced the worst and was ready to ride anyway. The chute gate flew open. The bull charged out like lightning, powerful, furious. The crowd roared. Jed held on. 1 second, 2, 3. Ellie stopped breathing. 4, 5. The bull spun sharp, back legs launching skyward. Yet's body jerked sideways, and then he flew, hit the ground hard. Dust swallowed him. The crowd gasped. Ellie stood, hands to her mouth, heart hammering. Seconds passed. Then Jed moved. He sat up slowly, wincing, yes, hurt, definitely, but upright. The arena exploded with cheers. Jed stood, raised a fist slightly, then turned to the stands. His eyes scanned. The crowd. Landed on her. He smiled. A little crooked, a little tired, but real. She climbed down the bleachers fast, ran past the rail, tears threatening. By the time she reached him outside the arena, he was leaning against the fence, breathing hard. You're insane, she said. Voice trembling. Maybe, he rasped, but I'm here. And then he whispered, I didn't ride to beat the bull. I rode so you know I could still stand. She didn't say anything, just grabbed his face, pulled him close, and rested. Her forehead against his. You don't have to fix everything, she whispered. I know, he replied. But I needed to fix this for us. And right then, for the first time in a long time, Ellie wasn't afraid, not of losing, not of loving. Just ready. The night after the rodeo was quiet, not the lonely kind, but the heavy, breathing kind. Jed lay in the small hospital room, his right arm in a sling, a scrape above his eyebrow. Nothing broken, just bruised deep and wide, like pain that had soaked into the bones. But his face, It wasn't the same man who'd fixed fences in silence weeks ago. He looked worn out, sure, but light, like a man who'd finally said something. Down after carrying it too long, Ellie sat beside him, fingers loosely wrapped around his. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying anymore. Why'd you do it? She whispered. Jed didn't answer right away. Just stared out the window where a streetlight flickered against the glass. You could have died, Jed. You know that. That bull was mean wild. He turned his head slowly. I didn't do it to prove anything, he said. I did it so. You'd see, I'm not just the man who carries guilt. I can be something more. I want to be. Ellie bowed her head, voice low and cracking. I never thought you were guilty. I was just scared of losing you before I even had a chance to love you. Jed really looked at her. There was no need to ask the next question out loud, She answered it anyway. Now I'm scared of not being beside you. And that was it. No grand kiss, no movie moment. Just two tired hearts holding hands in the glow of a hospital lamp, saying all the things they hadn't dared speak before. Walter Finch sat upright the next morning, propped up by a stack of pillows that looked bigger than him, but his eyes were clear, not wide, not confused, just calm. Ellie brought in his oatmeal on a wooden tray. Jed followed, moving slower than usual but standing tall. You two look like you've been through a war, Walter muttered, voice raspy. Ellie chuckled, setting the tray on his lap. You're not wrong. Walter took a slow spoonful, chewed. Like it was a steak, then swallowed hard. Heard it all, you know? Even when I was out cold. The letters, the talking, the silence. Heard you two breathing at night like you were holding your whole lives inside it. Jed shifted uncomfortably. Walter glanced between them, then reached for the nightstand. He pulled out a small, folded bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside, an old iron key tied to a leather string, worn smooth by time. He held it out toward Jed. Take it. Jed blinked. What's this? My land, Walter said. Across the river. Just past that old wooden bridge everyone forgot about. Weeds took over years ago, but the soil's still good. Ruth and I bought it to build a place when we retired. Never got around to it. Ellie stared. You're giving it to him? Walter grinned faintly. Man needs roots. Woman needs a porch. You both need something to build that isn't just memory. That land, it ain't much, but it's waiting. Jed held the key like it might vanish. If he blinked, I don't know what to say. Walter nodded. Then don't say anything. Just build something that matters. That's how you say thank you. Ellie touched Walter's hand gently. Why us? Walter looked at her, eyes soft, deeper than the words he'd been saying. Because love isn't what you say. It's what you leave behind. Then he leaned back slowly, eyes fluttering. Now, if it's all right with you, I think I'd like to rest a bit. Weeks passed. Walter grew weaker, but not smaller. Not in spirit. He asked Ellie to read more letters. Sometimes 3 a day. Jed began tending to him in quiet ways, checking the heater in the room, replacing cracked window panes, walking to the post office for fresh stamps, though no one was sending anything anymore. And one afternoon, when the sky was soft with evening, gold, Walter called Ellie into the room and asked for her notebook. I've got one more letter, he whispered. Not in the box. It's in here. He tapped his temple. It's for Ruth. You write it down? Ellie nodded and sat at the edge of his bed. Pen poised. Walter spoke slow, but each word felt wrapped in memory. Dear Ruth, if you can hear me, know this. I waited for you. Even after you were gone, I lived like you were still here. I talked to you, asked your advice, argued too. You'd laugh at how many times I fought with an empty chair, but now I'm not afraid. I saw love begin again, not ours, but because of ours. Those two, Jed and Ellie, they're not perfect, but they've got what we had. A little faith, a little stubborn, a lot of heart. I'm leaving them what's left of me, the land, the story, The chance we never took. So when my time comes, don't come for me with sadness. Come smiling. We were, Ruth, we were. And that's everything. Ellie wiped her eyes. Walter closed his. That night, he slipped away quietly. No pain, no sound. Just a hand resting on his chest and a smile still soft in the corner of his mouth. The notebook lay beside him. The final letter complete. And in the house behind the library, something new began to grow. Not just love, but legacy. Spring didn't come with fanfare that year. No sudden burst of flowers, no rainstorms to shake the earth awake. It just slipped in. Quietly, the grass grew a little taller. The wind carried warmth instead of warning. And in the field past the wooden bridge, something finally changed. There, on the land that Walter had spoken of, that place he had once imagined building a life with Ruth, stood a modest little house. 2 rooms, a porch that faced the hills, a crooked fence where birds liked to sit, and inside it the sound of life, the kind that didn't demand attention, the kind that simply existed because someone had chosen to stay. Jed stood out near the pasture, his hands wrapped around a feed bucket, calves nudging his boots with soft grunts. The dirt clung to his jeans. His shoulders were broad, but they didn't carry as much weight anymore. He still woke early, still listened to the wind before speaking. But now when Ellie came out with coffee in hand and a sleepy smile on her face, he smiled back, not the kind you give to strangers. The kind that says, I'm home. Ellie had taken a part-time job at the church school, teaching reading and art to children who didn't always know how to sit still, but always wanted to tell stories. At lunch, she'd walk home through the field, carrying a basket of notebooks and pencils. And without fail, Jed would meet her halfway. Not with flowers or grand gestures, just as presence. Just being there. Some evenings, they'd sit on the porch together, watching the sun melt over the ridge. And every now and then, when the light was soft and the world was quiet enough, Ellie would pull out that beat-up cassette player. Slip in the same old tape. Jed would hold out his hand and they would dance. No music, really. Just creaking wood and wind through the trees. But it was enough. They didn't talk much about the past. Not anymore. Not because they forgot it, but because they'd made peace with it. Jed still carried his brother's memory. It never left. But it stopped burning. It became something he could live beside. Walter's letters stayed with them, too. Ellie had bound them into a book, one she kept on the table by the window. Sometimes she'd read from it to the children at school. They're not love stories. She would say they're stories about staying, about choosing someone even when it's hard. She never mentioned Walter by name, but every child who listened seemed to understand something unspoken, that love wasn't just about what you felt. It was about what you did. One afternoon, a boy from town, no older than 10, came to the ranch carrying a wooden box, wrapped in twine. Said his mother used to help Walter at the old school years ago. Said she'd found it cleaning out the attic. Ellie opened the box gently. Inside, 2 old photographs, a pressed flower and a folded piece of paper. The photo showed a much younger Walter, standing beside a woman with tired eyes and a smile that hadn't been easy. Ruth. The letter was short. Just one line written in a trembling hand. If someone finds this, take it where the sun falls slow and the wind is soft. That's where we danced once. Jed looked at the ridge behind the house. They buried the box under the old elm tree there. Together. No service. No crowd. Just 2 people holding hands, whispering thanks to a man who had loved enough to leave something behind. Time passed, but the porch light never dimmed. The fence stayed repaired. The calves grew into cattle. Kids from school would visit sometimes, chasing chickens and scribbling poems under the shade trees. There were arguments, too. Of course there were. Jed could be stubborn. Ellie could go quiet when she was hurt, but they always came back to the same place. The same table, the same porch. The same question that needed no answer. You still here? Always. One summer night, long after the chores were done and the stars had stitched themselves across the sky, Ellie leaned against Jet's shoulder and asked, Do you think they're proud? Walter and Ruth? Jed took a deep breath, the kind that feels like more than air. I don't think they're looking down from some cloud or anything, he said slowly. But I think, somehow, they knew we'd make it here. That we'd finish something they never got to start. Ellie nodded. It's not perfect, you know. He looked at her soft-eyed. I don't want perfect. I want this. They sat in silence after that, the kind that didn't need to be filled, and in that silence something bloomed, not flowers. Not plans, just presence. Two people who had lost. Too much, and found enough in each other to keep going. Final narration for your channel voiceover. Love doesn't always knock on the door with roses in hand. Sometimes it shows up carrying old guilt, broken fences, and a box of letters from a stranger's past. But when it stays quietly, faithfully, it becomes something more. Not the love you chase, the love you build. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to share, and subscribe. Here at Weathered Stories, we believe every heart has a second chance. Until next time, friends, hold on to the good and let it grow.